So welcome everybody. This is the Metro DC EDS and HSD virtual support group meeting for April, almost May. And I'm here, I'm Kendra Nielsen-Miles. I am the founder and executive director of EDS Wellness. I'm just helping support the virtual meetings for the EDS, Metro EDS support group. I'm happy to have John and Kathleen here to talk about disability with EDS. So we're going to talk about applying for disability with EDS and going through the process and career stuff. And Kathleen is a lawyer and John is very active in our community. So I'm going to read a quick bio for each of them. So Kathleen Kane was the director for 8 years of a private post-secondary school, which prepared students for jobs in the computer and business fields. After attending law school at night and while working full-time, she became an assistant director, district attorney for the Lackawanna, if I pronounced that right, counties, district attorney in Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania, where she prosecuted domestic violence and sexual assault cases. In 1997, she went into private law practice in Scranton and Philadelphia and continued private practice after moving to Massachusetts. Ms. Kane has represented those who have been denied Social Security disability benefits since 1997. In 2002, she began representing claimants with connective tissue disorders. Ms. Kane has represented claimants around the country. She also has presented at seminars, workshops, and on applying for disability for the Marfan Foundation, the Ehlers-Danlos Society, and many other health organizations. John Rodis is the National Disability and Medical Advocate for Rare Disorders and serves on the Winthrop Disability Commission. He is also the founder and co-head of the Ehlers-Danlos New England, Massachusetts support group and the president of the Massachusetts chapter of the Marfan Foundation and chair of the chapter's Physician Awareness Committee for Marfan and Ehlers-Danlos syndromes. In addition, he serves on the Chronic Pain Partners EDS Awareness Advisory Board and was also a member of the Dysautonomia Support Network Board of Directors from 2016 to 2019, as well as the Ambry Genetics Advisory Board from 2015 to 2019. And I've personally worked with both of them off and on through different conferences that we've done. And there's such a wealth of information. And it's just, we're so grateful to have them as assets to our community and the time that they devote. So without further ado, welcome John and Kathleen. You guys, your screens are already up there. So we're gonna go ahead and get started on your presentation and then we'll have the Q&A afterwards. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kendra.
So the first issue is there are two types of Social Security disability. Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. This is for people who have worked and who have put into the Social Security system. And basically when you do that, when you put into the Social Security system, you earn what they refer to as credits. And basically these credits work for you to be insured under the program. SSDI is the same pot of money that retirement Social Security is from. Supplemental security income is for those who maybe haven't worked or worked a long time ago, and for children. And you don't have to put into the system, but it is based on financial need. So there are income and asset limitations that you have to meet. The medical determination for both programs is the same. It's just a matter of again, whether you've worked and put into the system or not. The first thing that I think is important is, making the decision to file, and this is mostly for someone who has worked and is, going to stop working. And John was in that position years ago, so I think he can speak to this a little bit.
You want me to cover all the points and just help?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the health considerations absolutely is paramount because I myself should have filed probably 11 years before I did because I was stubborn and I didn't want to give up my career. So I continued on. The only problem is the damage I did in those 11 years. I can't even tell you. I know I did a lot. So health considerations really should be number one. Can I continue working? Or if, let's say, if you're a young adult and can I keep a job? Can I work 40 hours a week? Those are things that you have to consider and what it does to your health to do that. In my career, I found myself, I even cut myself to part-time. Of course, that's not full-time. And I still had trouble doing the work because of my health and the degeneration of my condition. So health considerations are extremely important to consider. Take your time, think about it. but it is a very, very important one. Financial considerations, absolutely. For me, I had a very lucrative career, lucrative job, and those 11 years, I saw that start to dwindle away because of the inability to continue to work full time. So when you consider filing for disability as an adult or someone who has a career, these things play in your mind, and perhaps absolutely for good reason. You know, it affects you because nobody wants to go from making a decent
John's frozen a little bit.
healthcare,
Okay.
not putting pressure in the system. So that's important as well. These are things that I did not do very easily. They were very difficult, all of these things to go through it, to come to some sort of agreement with myself to do it. And then the next bullet is emotional considerations, which that's really kind of what I'm leading to, is it's not easy. And that's one thing I tend to help people with is, you know, even before they actually decide, you know, to file, is, you know, can they do something else? Can they do something else that they could work from home possibly? But emotional considerations are the deepest. I think I became very depressed towards as I realized more and more how much I was losing my ability to work and my degeneration of my body. So those things, it's really important to have a great system that helps you and supports you, whether it be family, friends. You know, it's just important to realize you're not alone in this either.
So the filing process can actually, it can be done online. If you go to www.ssa.gov, there's apply for disability, and it takes you through the process. You used to be able to do it in person, and maybe that'll happen again one day. But right now, if it's not online, then it would be a telephonic interview with someone at Social Security. Some of the things that you're going to need, whichever way you decide to apply, is you're going to need to have all of your medical information. So that's all of your doctors, all of your hospitalizations, all of your medications, everything about your medical condition. All right. If you give them this information, they're going to be able to order all of your medical records. So you don't necessarily have to provide medical records, but you should have all the information regarding doctors, hospitals, medications, etc.
You also want to review them, all your medical records, to see if there's anything written in there that isn't true.
Yeah, one of the things I say to people, even though Social Security is going to hire or get the medical records for a claimant, if it was me, I would get my medical records beforehand to see exactly what's being said, and you know, if there's something that you dispute, there's ways to dispute it. Besides your medical information, you're also going to need your last 15 years of work experience. Okay, so what you did, you know, roughly what your wages were, and what you did is most important. They're trying to understand what your past work experience was. So, and again, think about 15 years. It's also important at this point to get your doctor's support. Okay, so I always say to people, you know, before they file, have you talked to your doctors about this? Because if they're not supportive, then you're really going to have a problem. You know?
Want to address that?
Yeah.
That's paramount. Your doctors have to understand what your limitations are, and you'll probably say, most people say, well, they really don't know. Well, that's where someone like myself comes in. Basically, I can teach you some quick jewels of this. Is when I filed for disability, I realized my doctors didn't know about my quality of life and my limitations, and that was my fault because I was too stoic when I would go into a doctor's appointment. I was put on a brave face. But when I filed for disability, I realized I had to give them the full truth and tell them exactly what my limitations were. And I did that. I wrote out all my limitations, everything how I was affected, and I wrote it down and I brought it into them. And my doctors were very moved by it. Not only moved by it, but they're like, why didn't you tell me this? As well, because that's just the way I was raised. So it's important for your doctors to understand your limitations. So you talk to them about your fatigue, your pain, and give them examples of it. Because fatigue and pain are just words. But give them examples like you can't take a shower every day. Okay, how hard it is to shower. the fatigue you have, the dizziness that you have, the pain that you have, that their pain is mostly all the time. It's not 1 hour a day. All of these things you really need to get rid of them because their records are going to help you, especially now with the younger people. It's more difficult to get approved. There's a prejudice towards the young in the Social Security system. That's all the more reason you've got to get the doctors on board to saying, I don't care how old this person is, they cannot work full time, which is 40 hours a week for a year or more.
So John and I put this together when he was going through the process. We'll talk about the stages of appealing or applying for Social Security disability, but obviously the sooner you get approved, the better, because you're not working during this period of time. You know, you have to have, basically, if you are making more, it changes every year, but if you were making more than about, $1,100 a month, then you're not going to be deemed disabled. That's referred
Which is incredibly ridiculous. No, who can live on that kind of money?
So we put together a list of some things we think are important in the beginning process. So you want to?
Yeah, so when you're filling out the forms, of course, it sounds silly, but answer the question. But in the question, in the answer, if it has anything to do with the limitation, state the limitation. Give them an example. Now, in the forms, they don't give you much room, but there's a comment section at the end. Say question 2, continued, and then add it in. So if they're asking you about what you do during the day, or asking about what you do as far as activities like washing clothes, and well, say you met, if you wash clothes, great, I wash clothes, but it takes me 3 shifts to do these clothes, and I have to lay down for an hour because of it. Those are really important things to say on your forms, so they understand that you're not just a typical average person.
Yeah, and it's not unusual. I represent people at the hearing level when they're before a judge, and it's not unlikely that a judge would look at the forms that you filled out in the beginning and kind of bring those back up if they're not consistent with what you're testifying to. So be really careful about what you say in the forms. This isn't the time to be a hero. This is a time to express all of the things that you go through and all the limitations.
Yeah, you're not trying to show sunshine. You want to show how your life is. It's really important to prove those, to show those limitations and make sure, like I said, your providers know that. So we mentioned about the support letters, that comes later. No, that's later.
Yeah.
Okay. So state funding programs, it's always good to look within your state to see what programs, financial and supportive programs they have in your state. You would be surprised. There may be things that you have in your state you're not even aware of. The way to find that out is through your local state representatives that represent where you live. Talk to their office, talk to the staff, the governor's office of your state. There may be things out there that help you and can support you and that you weren't aware of because they don't advertise these programs mostly. Support letter. The support letter with some, well, actually, I'll mention the Mark Foundation. When I started helping people with disability in 2002 as an advocate, I started with the Marfan because I was clinically diagnosed with Marfan's. I thought I had at that point, but I found out later I had more. I offered to help them, and I thought they had a letter of support for the people who were disabled, but they didn't. So I said, well, I'll be willing to write one. So me and actually the woman that was before the present lady that's working there now, we wrote it together. And it is a letter of support coming from a national organization. It carries a lot of weight. The Mark Foundation to this day still has this process. So if you had all these downloads, you can get a letter of support from them because they do represent not just Marfan's, EDS, vascular EDS, Rose-Deep syndrome, and Spicklet syndrome. So it's a very important letter. And with I offer my services to anyone, and I can kind of explain how to do it, how to get it, and what to do. We mentioned about doctor support already. I can't, emphasize how important that is. You're going to hear a lot of things from lawyers and advocates and everything else about this is the way, that's the way, no, this is wrong, that's wrong. What matters most is proving it, proving your limitations, having them have your back. And if they don't have your back, then get away from them, get another doctor. You don't need a doctor that doesn't believe you. And if you have a doctor that questions your limitations, then, I know a lot of doctors don't, I'm sure you all know, they don't like to be able to be told by a patient, oh, here's this information, here's it. Make sure that they're willing to listen. If they're not, you better get away from them because they can hurt you. not just in disability, but for your care. You deserve to have someone that is going to listen to you because you have a very valid condition, whether you're disabled or not. Okay.
In terms of the condition research, what I usually suggest to people is that they provide some medical articles about what their disorder is, especially when it's a rare disorder. So, and there's tons of medical articles out there about EDS. You want to make sure it's kind of about what you are suffering from. Okay, but I feel that's important. In the beginning stages, you're going to have someone from SSA looking at your file. They're not going to know what EDS means or is. The judge probably doesn't even know. So as much as you can educate them, that's helpful.
Yeah, when I filed, I actually looked for information that had specifically to do with my symptoms, because you don't want to submit information on research that has nothing to do with the symptom you don't have or a condition you don't have. It doesn't carry any weight.
In terms of the doctor's evaluation, a lot of people say to me, well, my doctor doesn't want to write me a letter saying that I'm disabled. And I say, that's okay, because as far as the Social Security Administration is concerned, a doctor saying you're disabled doesn't mean anything. What the doctor can do is explain what your limitations are. Okay, so I actually have a form that I use that goes through limitations as opposed to this person is disabled. And so that's going to be much more effective.
Your medical records, like we went through earlier, it's very important to look through them. If there is something that is wrong, you should contact that practice, that hospital, the medical records department, and fill out the form and state this is incorrect. If you can get that backed up by a doctor that you're seeing now that supports what you're saying, that this is not true, this is what they have. I'm the doctor, and this is what that's going to help you change that. So having that doctor support is important. Anything else about the medical records that you can think of? Definitely have key copies of everything. Don't send stuff out and just assume, okay, now they have it. Don't do that. Make copies of everything. Make sure you have it. And then what we do is we tell people that you don't have to hire an attorney until the reconsideration stage. That means that's the stage where you get a second letter that says, we still think you can work. If you disagree, we'd like to have, we'd like to go to a hearing from the judge. That's when you need a lawyer. Okay, and that's really important because there's a lot of things that can be done beforehand and you might get approved. Oh, the daily journal. The daily journal is important to keep. My wife asked me to do it back in 2001, and I just, I kind of shrugged it off like, you're going to come to keep a diary. But she was right. What I did in the journal was you would write down daily things that happened to you, like if you had dizziness or you fell down, or God forbid you went to the emergency room, or you tried to do the laundry, or you went to do something and you had to rest for like 3 hours because of it. You're taking care of the kids, and all you could do in that time or in that day was very limited things because you didn't have the energy to do it. Those are really important. And if Kathleen's told me, if a judge opens that book and reads it, they might look at a couple of pages and see what your life looks like on a daily basis. No harm in doing that. Plus, you can learn from the journal too. I learned a lot from the journal about barometric pressure, about low pressure systems, how much they bother me. I learned about my schedule, what's more energy that I would have during the day. Is it better to get up early? Is it better to go to bed later? Those are things I learned from the journal. Also dietary things too, I learned from the journal.
So the first, when you first apply, there is something in the Social Security Administration called the listing of impairments. And the listing of impairments is a whole section of disorders, diseases, that if you meet the exact definition of what's in that listing of impairments, you're likely to be approved initially right away. Okay. With that being said, there is not a listing, or EDS is not in the listing of impairments. Okay. I use this example of Marfan's. Marfan's is in the listing of impairments. However, it's hard to meet the exact definition of this listing. Okay. I've represented, 100 people with Marfan's, and usually they are not approved because they meet this listing of impairments. However, that's not the end of the analysis. If you are not in the listing, the disorder condition is not in the listing of impairments, the next thing they go to is, what is your residual functional capacity? So taking everything into consideration, okay, all of your medical and mental impairments, what are you able to do? Right. So that's kind of the evaluation that they have to go through. And you should really be thinking about this from the very beginning, because this is the issue all along. You're going to have to prove, based on what your impairments are, what you can do and what you can't do. So a lot of people say to me, well, you know, is it important that I have a specific diagnosis? Not necessarily. They're not going to, especially because EDS isn't in the listing of impairments, they're not going to look at a diagnosis as being the most important thing. They're going to look at what your impairments are, how they affect you, are they supported by the medical records and by your doctor's opinions. So that's sort of the most important thing that you should get to realize from the beginning.
It's also to say one more thing about the listing of impairments. It is good to go through them because there may be conditions that you have that you meet the severity of the listing. Let's say it would be depression, anxiety and depression. And if your psychiatrist could be supportive of this, or believes that yes, just this alone could get you approved, then go for that, because you want to find something that can be utilized for a quick turnaround and quick approval.
Yeah, and there are, like, for instance, there's a musculoskeletal section of listing of impairments. So, you know, there could be that you need something under the list of impairments for musculoskeletal.
And the other thing I want to throw out is that if you previously worked and you had worked with someone that was aware of your limitations and the fact that you left because you could no longer do it, and there's someone that's an ally, not an enemy, they may be able to write a letter of support for you saying these are the facts, and it's not biased because they worked with you, they saw you. Anything that can support you, the better. Get that, because then it's going to be very helpful for you.
So these are the stages of the process. You apply initially. You're supposed to get an answer in 3 to 4 months. You know, sometimes that's longer, sometimes it's shorter. A lot of people are denied at that level, especially, again, if you don't hit the listing of impairments. Then if you are denied, you want to appeal, and you go into what they call a reconsideration phase. And that basically is just someone else at Social Security looking at your file to see if you should be approved. A lot of people, you know, the rate at which people are approved at reconsideration is not very high at all. If you're denied at reconsideration, then you want to appeal and ask for a hearing in front of an administrative law judge. This is the most important, I feel the most important time. You're going to be in front of the judge. Of course, nowadays, you're not in front of the judge. It's either a telephonic hearing or a hearing video with something similar to Zoom. But it's just, we'll talk about the hearing in more detail, but this is probably the most important part of the process. And just in terms of timing, because there was a question previously submitted about that, you know, your initial phase, 3 to 4 months, reconsideration is usually another 3 to 4 months. Waiting for the hearing could be a year, okay? And it can be longer, it can be shorter, it depends on the area of the country that you're in. But already you're talking a year and a half before you get in front of a judge at the minimum. So that's just something to keep in mind, because you're not going to be working for that year and a half, 2 years, sometimes longer, that you're waiting. If you are unsuccessful at the hearing, then you can go to the appeals council, and the appeals council looks at what happened at the hearing to determine whether there was mistakes. Again, it's probably only 15% of cases at the appeals council are actually either overturned or remanded. So obviously it's not a big percentage. That again is why the hearing is the most important. And if you're unsuccessful at the appeals council, you can take it to the United States District Court, and courts beyond that, U.S. Appeals Court, Supreme Court. That's only going to happen if you have an issue that has a significant legal basis as opposed to factual. The factual basis is going to happen at the hearing. Again, why that's so important. Obviously, just getting to the hearing is a year and a half, 2 years, you know, the rest of the process can be years upon years. Okay. So again, the hearings are very, very important. Preparation is key. Your lawyer has to be prepared and you have to be prepared. And, you know, that's probably one of the most important things. I hear horror stories of people meeting their lawyers 15 minutes before the hearing, and you know, that's just not acceptable.
You want a lawyer that's had experience of winning cases, winning EDS cases. Does it mean that a lawyer has to have had an EDS case before? No, if they have a lot of experience with different types of conditions and have had a lot of success, that's totally great. That's fine. But it does help when you have someone who's more experienced.
Yeah, and again, if they don't know your exact condition, but they're willing to learn, well, that's the most important thing. Okay.
Just like with doctors, same thing. You get a doctor, a young doctor. I actually love young doctors that are willing to listen and learn, because that's like planting a seed. That's what you want. You know, not as much as a young attorney, you know, necessarily, but as a doctor, you do.
You can bring witnesses to the hearing. You know, that's always a tough call because you don't necessarily want to have someone as a witness that is going to say exactly what you're saying. Your testimony is going to be the most important. And you know, if it's a family member, the judge is going to, well, you know, of course they're biased. But if for some reason I have a client or a claimant that is not really able to, you know, to express themselves and to advocate for themselves, then I might bring a witness to basically just kind of bolster their testimony.
The ultimate thing Kathy would love for you to do is if you can get a doctor, your doctor, one of your doctors to come. Well, not come, that means on the phone or for like, you know, because they usually ask about an hour, Kathy.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for doctors to make that commitment.
But it's worth asking, right?
Yeah, you know, that's why the forms that I spoke about earlier can be important if your physician would fill out the forms. They can have medical experts at the hearings, but that doesn't happen very often. Okay, and when there's a medical expert, when I say expert, it's not an expert in EDS or whatever your disorder is. It's usually your run-of-the-mill primary care physician who is testifying. So again, it doesn't happen very often that they do have medical experts. And if they do, you know, you as the client who has the disorder, and I as an attorney who have represented many people with connective tissue disorders, probably know more than the medical expert about your condition. So I'm never concerned with a medical expert.
She actually welcomes it.
Yeah. Vocational experts, they usually do have at a hearing. And what a vocational expert does is, after hearing your testimony, the judge will give a vocational expert what we call a hypothetical question. And hypothetical will say something like, if you have a person of the claimant's experience, education, age, and they have the following limitations, would there be jobs that they could do in the national economy? And a vocational expert, usually the judge will give them a couple hypotheticals with the limitations being different. Your lawyer is able to cross-examine the vocational expert, which again is probably
Really important.
a good reason to have a lawyer at the hearing, because yeah, because that can be important. So vocational experts usually are at a hearing, but again, their testimony can certainly be dealt with. And again, I keep saying that same word, limitations. It's all about the limitations.
Yeah. And proof of limitation. And when I was just thinking real fast, Kathy, was that Kathleen, I call her Kathy, was that with your limitations, you have many of them. So you have fatigue, you have pain, issues of memory and concentration, standing and sitting you can't do for long periods of time. With all of this stuff coupled together, added together, then that basically says, how can this person work? You know, and that's really important for the doctor to understand it, because then they'll put that into their records, and Social Security will see that.
Yeah, one of the other things I always try to prepare people for in the beginning is that the Social Security standard of working is a 40-hour work week. Okay, and basically, if you ask the vocational expert, they will tell you that in a normal job, you're going to have a 15-minute break in the morning, a half hour for lunch, and 15-minute break in the afternoon. Other than those breaks, you're supposed to be what we refer to as on task the majority of the rest of the time. Okay. So if you are experiencing pain or fatigue, obviously it's going to have an influence on your ability to concentrate on what you're doing, meaning you're not going to be on task. Okay.
You have to go to the bathroom multiple times during the day.
Right.
We're not gonna allow that.
Right. The other standard is, if you're going to miss more than, and vocational experts will vary with how many days, but if you're going to miss, 3 days a month, you're probably not employable, right? Your employer is probably not going to find that acceptable. So, if you're a person who has multiple medical appointments in a month, that has an effect on it too.
I was just gonna say for the doctors, we're gonna go back to, because I know somebody probably thinking this over. How do I get my doctors to understand? That's when you have to go through all your limitations. So a lot of you, you look younger than you really are, which is great. For those of you who are early, young or whatever age you are, you want to talk about your limitations with the doctor so they can understand, like I mentioned about showering, fatigue, like I use the cold and flu description. I've been using that since 2001. I won't tell that story. Some of you probably already know that one about me talking to Social Security. They thought, like, you're disabled, that kind of the guy even said that to me when I walked in the door. And instead of punching him, I said to him, yeah, think about the last time, let me explain part of this to you. Think about the last time you had a cold and you had achy, you felt like, crappy, and hardly any energy. That's how I feel 2 days a week. I let them sink in on him. And then I said, now think about the last time you had a bad flu. And you hurt from head to toe, you're extremely weak. Getting from the bed to the bathroom was a huge feat. That's how I feel 4 to 5 days a week. Those are true explanations of just that limitation. That's just fatigue and pain. There's a whole lot of other ones, dizziness, issues with memory, concentration, like I mentioned earlier, a ton more. So those are things your doctors need to understand and give them examples, real world examples of, the showering has been a big home run when I use that in not only for disability, but medical accuracy. They're really blown away because for a healthy person, a showering is invigorating. For someone like us, it's almost like torture.
Yeah, that's very important in your testimony. If you can give examples, it's one thing to say that, I'm in pain. Okay, it's another thing to say, I have this shooting pain down my leg and it happens, every half hour or continuously for an hour or, whatever it may be. Giving examples can be very, very effective in your testimony.
Go ahead.
One of the things I do want to say about this whole process, though, is it's not an easy one, okay? And it's gotten much more difficult over the years, okay? 15 years ago when I was doing this, even 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, if you got to even though you were denied the first couple of times, if you got to a hearing, over 70% of people would be approved at a hearing. Now the overall statistics, across the nation is less than 50% of people are approved at a hearing, okay? And some judges approve less than 20% of people that come before them. So it's not an easy process. And I just like to set realistic expectations. It doesn't mean that, you shouldn't be approved or you shouldn't apply because, if you can't work, you certainly should, but that's why you have to take every step. And as very, very important, do everything that you can to get approved from the beginning.
Absolutely. And you're going to know when you have the hearing, you're going to get the judge's name, you're going to be able to see what their approval rate is. And I hope when you do get to that point that it's not 24%, that it's 40%, 48, 50%. That would be wonderful because, I don't want to get into, I could speak for hours about how I feel unethical it is for someone to have a 28% approval rate. That means 72% of the people that come to them are not telling the truth and they can work. And that is totally not true. Questions? Did you want to go through the list or?
Yeah, so I think the first question we had is just how you start the process and what can you do ahead of time. I think we talked about that. You need to have all their medical information. need to have all of your information regarding your work history. And you also have to have your doctor on board, so to speak, with what you're going to do and know that he or she is going to be helpful with the process. What John does, free of charge, is help people in the connective tissue disorder community in the beginning process so that, maybe they can get approved initially. So I'm sure he'd be happy to do that. The next question is, how are people with EDS and other connective tissue disorders, how often are people approved? They don't keep statistics like that, that I'm aware of. So, EDS is, I guess, still referred to as a rare disorder, although how rare,
Mobility is,
so it's going to be harder than, again, something that's in the listing of impairments. But I mean, let's face it, it can be a very debilitating disorder. Okay, so in that context, obviously, it can be easier.
And then along with that, you've got to remember, and you all know this, is that with Ehlers-Danlos, mast cell, dysautonomia, POTS, the child of dysautonomia, so many other conditions go hand in hand with majority of us. Majority of people have Ehlers-Danlos have those. So those can be very, very disabling just on their own. Mast cell can be very disabling. So those are important too to investigate and see if you meet the severity or if your doctors can help you meet the severity.
The next question is, if you have a multi-system issues, what issue is it best to focus on when applying? What I tell everyone is, first of all, you have to tell them everything that you're suffering from. Okay, every single thing, even if it's not related to EDS, and including your mental impairments. People, my experience anyway has been that many times people with chronic pain disorders suffer from depression and anxiety. It's just, I think a natural thing. So those things should be included as well. And if you do suffer from those things, it's obviously best to have help and have treating sources for those things as well.
And I just want to throw one thing in for not only for your doctors, but I've done this in the past with my medical, speaking at hospitals and medical schools, is I'll bring up, because when there's a question of anxiety and depression, a lot of times doctors use it against us, as if that all our problems are because all our problems are in our head. The way to change that thinking, and that it's been working really well, is I did a talk at Mass General Hospital from the GI department there. And someone had brought up that question. I was hoping someone would mention anxiety and depression. And I said, because one of the young doctors asked a very valid question. Some of our patients, a lot of our EDS patients have anxiety and depression. And then I said, I'd like to ask all of you, I'd like to ask the room this question. If you had pain every moment of every day, and you had fatigue pretty much every moment of every day, and you had dizziness occasionally, if not every day, and you had issues with memory and concentration. I went through this whole list, and if you had anything you put in your mouth, you had to know what the hell what it was, because it could make you throw up, it could make you pass out, or your blood pressure would change in an instant. And I went through this litany, and then I said, would you have anxiety and depression? And the room, all of them basically nodded yes. So that's a very good example to you.
And in terms of having multiple issues, you have to throw everything out there, but you want to focus on the ones that cause your limitations.
Right.
Okay, again, getting back to the limitations part of it, it's all about the limitations.
Severity of the limitations, yeah.
How long does it take to receive SSDI if approved? What is average of the time it takes to receive SSDI? So I think I went over a little bit about the time frame, 3 months, a year, although it could be longer. Once you go to a hearing, you are going to wait probably a month or two, if not longer, for a judge's decision. And usually if there aren't any problems, then you would start to receive benefits, soon thereafter, about a month thereafter. But again, all of that is hoping that you have a good experience going through this, which doesn't always happen. How many times on average are people denied prior to being approved? Again, the stages, first time denied, reconsideration denied, then you have to wait for a hearing before a judge. And again, that's probably the time when most people are successful at being approved. If you're on SSI and participating in Ticket to Work, do those hours count towards Social Security's quarterly work credits? And if so, can someone move from SSI to SSDI? So I don't know the exact answer to that question, but if you're working, which you would do in the Ticket to Work program, then you are contributing to the Social Security system. And contributing to the Social Security system is that way that you earn credits. So my feeling is that the answer to that would be yes, you are getting new credits, so to speak, and could eventually probably be eligible for SSDI. If you plan on going back to work, it's best to do it through the Ticket to Work program. Absolutely, because then you have your fallback. You can get benefits for a while, and then you have a while after that to see if you can successfully work. So that's certainly a good idea. If someone returns to work within 5 years, but can't continue because of medical reasons, you don't need to reapply, but you have a medical review. To what extent is Social Security approved going back on SSDI, or is this risky? Medical reviews are also done if you are not back at work. So you can have a medical review, especially young people usually have medical reviews because they are young. And medical reviews are usually winds up, again, as long as you have the support of your doctor, you're going to be successful. So that's going to be the key, I think.
And that support is really more important to mention because I've helped a lot. Everyone I'm done 1,000, everyone that's gotten those letters where they're going to have their Social Security taken away, or it was taken away, I've gotten them back on it by basically getting their doctors to write a letter stating the degeneration since they filed. So, I mean, since they were approved, they didn't get any better. They actually got worse.
Yeah, so that's, which is another reason, I don't think I mentioned before, but even after you're approved, it's important to continue treating, okay? Because you're probably going to need that doctor documentation somewhere along the process. So you have to continue with your treating sources.
And as you're right now, if you are in the process right now, thinking you're filing or you're going to file, it's really important also to look and see, have I had the testing that I need to have done? There's a lot of testing doctors don't even know to give to a patient that has Ehlers-Danlos or a related disorder. That's really key because then it will bring up diagnoses, it will provide more support, more information, and also improve your care.
Yeah, and as much as I said the diagnosis isn't as important as the limitations, and that's correct, I would try to get a diagnosis, from a geneticist. It just makes it look a little.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you have, and I've just ran across someone I'm helping now that she has multiple sclerosis. So sadly, she found out she had. But that's going to be a much easier road to get her approved now with the doctor's support, because that is recognized. That is one of the conditions that's recognized.
Another question is, when you reach retirement age, SSDI is converted to regular Social Security retirement. That's correct. Does Social Security recalculate the regular retirement to include taxes paid into Social Security while on SSDI? My feeling, again, I don't know the answer for sure, but my feeling is that SS or your retirement Social Security, whether it's disability retirement or retirement, is based on putting into the Social Security system. So you're employed, your employer is taking out Social Security out of your paycheck, and they are also contributing to Social Security. So that's the way that you earn your credits for disability, and that's what takes into consideration how much you're going to get for retirement Social Security. So my answer, I think, to that would be, just because you're paying taxes on it, I don't think that would be enough. You have to be actually putting into Social Security system.
And don't ever hesitate to ask, to call your local Social Security office and ask them questions like that, because they should know. They should know.
Okay, that's all the questions we had prior.
And I have several in the Q&A
Sure.
and also a couple in a mail, and you guys are doing great. These are so helpful and you go fast through them. So I'm hopeful that do you mind answering more, because we have several, but this is so great.
We have definitely have time.
Do you mind exiting out of your shared screen just so that we can see your faces, your wonderful faces, so more clearly? I have to say, this is also very informative. I've gone through the process myself because I had to, because of working with years ago with Johnson and Johnson and having to go out on disability at a very young age, and then having to go through the process for Social Security disability. And it my issue that I ran into, and why I chose to start working for myself and find a way, and that was my choice because I was young, was similar to the one I just received in an email that I'm going to read you. She says, I'm 39. I have a master's degree and I've worked since I was 16. I currently have very high paying corporate job making 130K annually, but I may not be able to work much longer. What is the maximum that I can make on Social Security disability? And I guess it seems like that's if you earn a decent income and that maybe you're supporting a family on it and they're dependent upon it, but then you can't work, it's really challenging. So how do
Yeah.
they?
Oh, yeah.
I think it changes, but I think the maximum now is somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 a month. So again, when you're
And
used to
then-
making that kind of money, yeah.
Yeah.
And then if you go out and you work on your own, like I opted to try to figure out something to do for myself, it's kind of a catch-22 as I've gotten older. And if I ever need to, I guess, apply, which sometimes is debatable according to my husband, but like I don't have the credits. I don't believe,
Yeah.
how does self-employment, or, if you're a sole proprietor, you have a small business, obviously EDS Wellness is, I pay to run it versus it pays me. So I have other for-profit income that helps support EDS Wellness. But how is that judged or looked at in terms of credits?
It's not. If you're not putting into the Social Security system, then you're going to lose your credits. And what you can do, and I'm not an accountant, but I think you can have your accountant take out Social Security for you.
Yeah, I wonder if he does that as part of it. It's very curious. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's
definitely.
worked for themselves,
Yeah.
Contractor,
Yeah,
found some
definitely
way to
ask
do
them.
it.
The accountants,
Yeah.
that's one of the things that they can do and look into for you.
One of the situations that I've run into several times, which is very unfortunate, is I've had some claimants with EDS who, you get sick and you think you're going to get better. Okay, so you get sick, you stop working, but it's always in your head, I'm going to go back to work. I'm going to go back to work. I'm going to go back to work.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you never go back to work and they don't realize that they've lost their credits and they're no longer eligible for SSDI.
Well, you've worked on your own. You've worked for yourself. You found a way to do it. And,
Right.
It's
And
yeah.
you can go to SSA.gov and they can tell you by putting in your Social Security number what you have vested, what your work credits are and what you would get per
Yeah.
month.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely challenging.
Yes.
I appreciate that both of you are going through this, and also that, John, you talked about the conditions in Marfan's versus EDS and how they're looked at, and then also talking about that it's a serious consideration to talk about going through this process and seeing, if you can work, is there something that you can do? Because it does play a role in like how you feel, and it's already hard enough to do this and to go through it, and then to know that the process can be so long and daunting is just really challenging. Do you get backdated payment once you're approved? If
You
it
do.
really does take that long?
Yeah, so basically what's going to happen is you're going to have what they call an alleged onset date. And that's usually when you stop working would be your alleged onset date.
I was gonna say at birth.
Right.
I know.
So if you're approved, you're going to get retroactive from your alleged onset date 5 months forward. For whatever reason, they don't count the first 5 months after you stop working. But you will get that retroactively, all right? And by the way, if you hire a lawyer, the way that Social Security demands that lawyers charge is they get 25% of your retroactive benefits. So they can't charge any other way. They can't charge up front, they can't charge hourly, that's how they charge.
To a maximum of 6,000.
Yeah, and if you are not approved, they don't get anything, so.
And when I filed in September and I got approved in May, which was ridiculously fast. But the two things that came out of that was, number one, I wasn't going to be able to get Medicare. It's 2 years after the date that they deemed you disabled is when you start Medicare. So I had to be on Cobra, which was a killer. And then the retroactive does not hit till after 5 months from the date that you were deemed disabled. So if they deemed me disabled September 20th, then they would look 5 months after that to start paying me. Then I get my retroactive.
Got it. It's so complicated, and all these questions are so helpful because, gosh, if you don't go through the process and don't ask or assume something, and then, you go through all this and then you jeopardize your benefits after you fought for so hard.
Mhm.
Okay, so
I've
somebody has a,
actually, what's sad is I've actually had to correct Social Security people who work there. They say something that isn't true. Like they tell people you
I don't
can't
doubt
work,
that.
oh yeah, you can't work, which you can work, but part-time. As long as you're making over that $1,200 amount, because you have to live. You can't go to school. Yes, you can go to school because school's not 40 hours a week. There's a lot of things like that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. That nuances is important though, because a lot of people don't realize that if they work on the side or do, something for cash or something, that they could also jeopardize the benefits that they're receiving. So that, in terms of how much they can work or not is also important. And you guys clarified that. So somebody's asking, this is a good question, is how do royalties play into Social Security disability? I receive royalties for music compositions on a yearly basis. So it's not monthly, and I have no idea how much they're going to be from year to year. If I make more than the maximum in 1 month while on Social Security disability, could they take it away?
No.
So royalties are on work that you've already completed in the past, okay? So that's not going to count as, it's basically earned income that they're looking at, okay? So income that you go out and work for currently, all right? I mean, you can have $1 million in the bank and still be approved for SSDI.
Right.
It doesn't go by assets or income. But
So
yeah,
that would apply to publishing royalties too, I assume.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, John's always like, well, what happens when I sell my book? I'm like,
Right. When you make millions selling your bookstore and all the people that you help,
Oh,
John, I'm all supportive for you.
Get it right, Kathy.
Somebody asked, will the PowerPoint be available or can you make it available in a PDF form or something like that afterwards?
Sure.
sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think
All
one
right.
of you has
Yeah, you and Danielle have.
Okay. Okay. We just making sure because it's your PowerPoint.
Sure.
So it's always best to ask. Is there, and of course, here's my eyesight, I can't see, so that's another question I have. Are there recorded decisions of earlier cases involving EDS? Would they help prepare? Like, can you go back and look at cases of EDS that have maybe been approved, how they were done, and to help with your case?
So the only thing that is publicly available would be once it got to the court system, in the U.S. District Court. Again, by then the issues are probably more legal than factual. One of the things John and I would suggest is, if you're part of a group like this or a support group, talk to other people.
Yes.
Likely there is somebody who's been through the process or a couple people that have been through the process, and that can certainly be helpful. But a judge's decision, a hearing, is not available publicly as far as I know. So.
And also a good thing about, another thing great about support groups is the fact that you get medical recommendations, because I find the best medical recommendations come from us, people who are affected, that go to these doctors and know who's great and who stinks, basically. But that's really important too, because you do want to have a good team, despite
In a nice way of saying who's hopeful or not.
That's right.
Yeah, I agree. There's so much, and I can't say enough about legal help. I have sought lawyer help in so many different areas of law, and all lawyers are so specialized, and I can't say enough about the help that you guys provide in just this presentation, but also representing people, because I don't know that you would really know how important it would be to help have a lawyer in this situation. And I just appreciate lawyers. I appreciate everything that you guys do. It makes such a difference in terms of outcomes, how you feel about yourself, knowing that you're doing things right, and also just information.
That they're talking about is important.
Right.
Kathy, as you read by the bio, she has quite a lot of, she does family law. She doesn't just do disability. A lot of people don't even realize that. They just think she's a disability attorney, but that's okay.
Yeah. I'm still thinking maybe going back to part-time. Maybe that's my next career thing I'm gonna do is law. All right, so could a witness be somebody like a physical therapist, or does it have to be an MD or a DO?
Good question.
It could be a physical therapist. So there's certain weight that's given to doctors, and obviously a medical doctor has the most weight. Okay, a physical therapist, although arguably they may know more about you than your MD, but yeah, that could definitely be a physical therapist.
And especially if they're a physical therapist that has a name for themselves, you know, I'm not saying that they're better than other physical therapists, but someone that has a lot of experience. So they don't just have one EDS patient, they have 20, 30, 40.
Sure.
That carries a lot more weight.
Yeah, or like a child psychologist or somebody like that that does a neuropsych testing and is very, does write-ups. I mean, that would be incredibly helpful
you know
too
what?
for younger patients.
Yeah.
You know, I want to tell you one thing I just realized, because my brain fog's lifted a little bit, is the fact that subluxations and dislocations, I find people value them. They don't tell their doctors really about them or explain what a subluxation, well, not explain, the doctors don't want to have things, they don't want to be told that they have to learn something, but it's important to tell them that you have subluxations and dislocations, and then put that into make sure it's in your records.
More important than that, you have to explain what comes along with that. I had a hearing once, and it was an EDS claimant, and she had many dislocations, severe ones, and her husband would put her back in place, and she testified to all that. And at the end, the judge said, I dislocated my arm years ago when I was surfing, and it was the most painful thing I ever experienced in my life. And the fact that that happens to you so often is unbelievable, and you're approved.
Right. Well, and even dislocating one time, a lot of times
Right,
people have residual issues even
Right.
that one time in that joint. And so imagine
Right.
doing it all the time. So
sometimes
where
it
if
just
it's like,
takes someone having that experience to understand,
for sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's all so pertinent. Okay. Does it help to have a former HR right to explain that you have gone in sick time and gone into sick time deficit, or about how many doctor's appointments I have? Like, does it help to have HR record? I guess is more.
Yeah, that would be
Yes.
really important and really helpful if you can get that.
Yes, absolutely. Anyone that can testify to something they work with you, especially in HR, that would be awesome. Or an owner of the company, or somebody who's a senior member of the company that saw that. And, there are good people, there are good employees, good bosses out there.
And I would imagine that if you're asking somebody to come and help testify as a reason to provide them a stipend or offer them a fee for their services, is that right? Or is that not done?
Well, it's not done through Social Security.
No, I mean, like for your case.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, you could just have a letter submitted, okay? Although obviously actual testimony would be probably more effective, number one. Number two, this whole year has maybe been good for some reasons. And some of those reasons are, we do hearings with Social Security through telephonic or through a Zoom
Virtual,
thing.
yeah.
So it's a lot easier for a witness to jump on a Zoom call to testify than it would be to show up at a Social Security disability hearing and take time off from work and so on and so forth. That may continue after we're through COVID, them doing it through telephonic and or Zoom. So that might be a good thing that's come out of all of this.
And another piece is that Kathy said, right, that she had a doctor that actually came to the hearing physically, but they didn't ask for money, and most doctors won't ask for money. They'll just say, sure, I can do this for half an hour.
But if you're able to provide that to them and you think it's necessary, that's fine.
Yeah, it just was, if you're in a situation where, you need to, you need that strongly, and, you need to be cognizant of somebody's time.
Right.
I don't know, it's just one of those things I think about. All right, how do judges and vocational experts generally feel about a condition that fluctuates so much? Are there good and bad days and good months and bad months? I was improving for a while after surgery and then was prepping to go back to work. I'm on disability with my work, but then became bedridden out of the blue. There's just no consistency. So how do they view that kind of?
Yeah.
Well, in terms, remember we talked about if you're going to miss a certain amount of days a month, you're not going to be employable. Vocational expert, will say that. So if it's good days and bad days, absolutely, that's going to be taken into consideration. You know, the longer term, I'm okay for 3 months and then I'm not, is a little trickier, I guess, you know. But again, some of that also is about, well, the other thing is, if you're going through your good 3 months, are you really that good? You know, number one.
Right, it's all relative. I think we become
Yeah.
very
It's
good at
sustainable
dealing.
Because Social Security comes down to, you have to work 40 hours a week for a year or more. If you can't do that, and this person can't, then they're disabled.
You mean you can't work for 1 week and then be in bed for 3 weeks and not be able to function? It's all right. I think we become very used to our normal that really isn't
Yeah.
normal for a lot of people. And, you know, I mean,
Well, you know, the system, well, the country, people in general, they don't understand disability, but more so not invisible disability. And a lot of us
right.
have that. Someone who meets me probably wonders in the back of their mind, this guy's disabled. I mean, you know, he looks fine. But, you know, or see my credentials and say, wow, he has all these credentials. Well, how can he be disabled? Well, because I can only do the stuff I do. 15 hours a week is the max, or 20 possibly. Otherwise, I'm bedridden.
Some of that also is about educating and advocating. I always tell my claimants, you know, you have to be able to explain what this disorder is about, that it's right now, unfortunately, incurable, and it's usually progressive, so you're not necessarily going to get better. And as much as I hate trying to be Debbie Downer telling people that, I mean, this is the time
It's a
to the
not
judge
to
to
be
know
positive.
the
Yeah.
bad part about what your condition
Yes.
is.
Yeah, so if you have ring splints, or you have bracing, or you have a cane, or you have a wheelchair, that's when it's visual, because, you know, it's not, you're not lying because you use those things. I'm not asking anyone to not tell the truth, because I'm very ethical when it comes to that. But they need to see these things, and they need to realize that one day you could be looking just fine, or you could have that energy, and the next day you're in bed all day. You know.
Do videos help? And somebody actually asked about that. Do videos of something that happens occasionally, such as dystonic episode, can you show those at a hearing? My hearing is coming up this summer and it'll be a virtual video conference.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've never done that. I don't think I've ever had anybody that had a video, but yeah, it seems like that would be very helpful. Absolutely.
Especially if you have somebody that's a professional that can help back it up and support the occurrences and explain how that impacts. I would
Exactly.
assume would be very helpful too.
Yes.
Well,
All right.
I had a couple of days ago, I had a part-time helping that fainted in the doctor's office. So I said, well, because they were fine for this, they're fine. I said, well, have the doctor write that, state that in his letter, that's happened while, you know, it just, the blood pressure went from this to this. That can be very helpful.
So it goes back to the whole journal thing and just really making sure that you're just documenting like literally everything.
Yes.
As much as you possibly can. It reminds me of the My Symptoms app for, like, you know, trying to figure out your triggers. It's literally like literally documenting everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that journal is so good. I would imagine that videos and even little notes would be helpful. Pictures. I sure as heck have my own set of pictures I take over the years of progression of body thing issues. So somebody asked, so do you lose work credits once you start on Social Security disability?
Yes, as long as you're only maintaining your work credits if you're putting into the Social Security system. So if you're on Social Security, you're not doing that.
Right. If you are past your date of insurability, but you know that you could prove that you were disabled while you had the work credits approximately 3 years prior, are the chances much less to get approved? Good question.
So I have had a few of these cases, and they are more difficult, okay? As you can imagine. I just think conceptually, it's hard for a judge to say, oh, okay, I have to look back 3 years ago and see if she was disabled then. I have been successful doing that, however, and if you have the medical documentation, then it could work, absolutely.
It's a good question. Especially, you know, for, again, back to people like that might have gone and started working up for themselves.
I probably asked my doctor to be very specific about that, though, in filling out the forms, that they've treated you for this long again, previous to the date last insured, and that you had this condition and you had these limitations then.
Yes.
I'll tell you, it's like fighting to get chromium sodium approved too. I mean, it's like, just reminds me, I'm like, this is so silly.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. If you are past your date, oh, I just asked that. Once disability has been approved, can it be taken away? My new PT seems to be pushing that I can do the PT and I should be able to go back to work. That is Medicare's goal. I mean, Medicare, that's the goal. In the meantime, laundry isn't done for weeks. Laundry done for weeks. No laundry done for weeks. I get what they're saying. So they're saying the PT's pushing, that's Medicare's goal. PT feels like they could be able to go back to work, but meanwhile, life at home is falling to the wayside, which
A PT
I
really
get
can't
that.
say whether someone can actually go back to work. Just
Right.
like the surgeon that does surgery on you. I had to talk to many surgeons and say, don't put a letter stating, oh, I did the heart surgery. Now they can go back to work. No, all you corrected was this particular part of the valve and part of the aorta. You did not change the mast cell, or you did not change these other issues that are limiting. So, you know,
There are medical reviews, okay, and a lot of things go into how often or whether you have a medical review. The younger you are, you're more apt to have medical reviews fairly often. So, you know, that to generally answer your question, but yeah, I mean, be careful of doctors, and as John said, surgeons are the worst. Surgeons think that when they've done their job, you're all better, okay, and we know
It's
that's
magic.
right. So.
Yeah, I laugh because I remember I had a medical review at Johns Hopkins Hospital in the like PT department. They were literally watching me and like assessing me. And I remember being like, this is so anxiety ridden. I was 26. I'm like, they're just looking. I mean, how are they gonna approve me? And I just remember being like, I felt like I was under a microscope and being like, this is like set up for failure.
Right.
You know, but it was under this, you know, at Hopkins, under this, like, just watching me do things that I'm like, this isn't even showing how it affects my day.
Right.
Like, anyway, years ago, but it's
a lot
just,
of people, another thing I've done is just, you know, with my friends, I show up at an event and they'll say, you know, you look good. And then they'll backtrack. And they'll say, no, I know you're sick. And I'll say, it took me 2 hours to look like this, you know? And they're like, wow, like, yeah, it takes that long to just get yourself together, to
yeah.
psych
And that was
yourself
probably
out.
the first time you did that. And, you
Yep.
know,
And the other
weeks
thing is
kind of-
people, another thing for doctors, I use this too with not just my doctors in general. You may look like fine on the outside, but there's a hurricane inside of us. There's all
Yeah.
these things
Oh.
going on, and it's
It's
something
so
that
validating to be with people that understand, because it really is very, very true. And it's just very humbling. You know, I appreciate you guys so much. I have more questions. We can
Oh.
try to get through them fast if you're willing. It's 8:11.
yeah, we have time.
Okay.
Right.
When you
I don't
start
think
an
the bachelor's on, is it?
application,
Because it's a bachelor's on, she probably has to run.
right? Fair enough. When you start the application, can you stop and come back to it later, or do you have to complete it all at once?
You can come back to it later. They'll give you a reentry number when you first start the application. So just make sure you hold on to that, and you can always go back in.
Okay, somebody asked if you have a diagnosis that is recognized in the blue book labels, such as spinal disc degeneration, is it better to file using your blue book diagnosis or all your other coexisting conditions like HEDS, POTS, MCAS, Chiari, everything?
Yeah, so you obviously you use everything, but if something is in the listing of impairments, which is the blue book, then yeah, put that first, you know.
Yes. And you also have to meet the severity of it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, some people can have MS and still be working. you know?
Right. Do they look at you as a percentage of disability? Like if you have eyesight issues, like I do clearly, and I can't, you know, my pupils don't dilate and I can't drive at night. So that's an autonomic issue, and I've lost my vision at night. And besides it already being crappy, do they look at you in terms of percentages of disability? Like how do they look at things like vision and hearing and, you
Well,
know, things like that on a blue
For
book?
me, it was the cumulative effect. I didn't meet any listing severity. None of this listings of, I never met any of the severity. It was having all of these added on top of one another. The
Yeah.
fatigue, the pain, fibromyalgia, osteoarthritis, it all adds up to disability.
Yeah, the percentage question, that's more found in workers' comp cases and personal
Right.
injury cases.
Or military too.
And military too,
disability.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this again is about the limitations and the cumulative effect of the limitations.
Yeah. I think your stress on the limitations is,
Yes.
and really, really going into detail about those is really important versus just labeling the condition and talking about really how it impacts is so important and helpful. When you start, okay, the start and stop, does Social Security, okay, do they look at your social media? I often post happy things rather than the reality of my life because I don't want to worry my friends. They look at your
So here's-
social media.
Yeah, we both have
It's a
stories.
good question.
So, you know, do they look at it? Depends on the judge, all right? And it is not written anywhere whether they can or cannot. My feeling is they probably do, okay? So
Yeah.
I've been a supervisor for many, many years in different capacities. And since social media came up, before I hire anybody, I look on their social media page. So I just do, you know.
Yeah,
So,
it's true. I mean, I think a lot of us do that too. I
There's
mean,
people in the past, you know, since I've been doing this for 20 years, one of the women I helped got her Social Security taken away from her because she was holding up this, she's supposed to only lift 10 pounds. She was lifting a fish that was like 25, 30 pounds.
she was
You know what I
one
mean?
time
But she
going
only did it for,
jellyfish.
like, you know, a matter of seconds, and then she had to put it down. But I said, you don't do that. You don't put that down
If
because
it's-
it makes you look like you're not telling the truth.
But if your account's private, they can't see it. Am I right? Or can they?
that I don't know, I'm assuming.
The other thing
Okay.
is that you know, this has happened where somebody doesn't like you and they take a picture of the screen and then they send it in.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
That can, yeah, but a lot of times people are blurred. They talk about something that really isn't a disability case. It's a workers' comp case.
sure.
You know, geez, that person down the street there, you know, they got Social Security. Well, they're not on Social Security, they're on workers' comp, you know, so.
Yeah, and it's hard being judged. I mean, I remember going through that when I was on disability for Johnson & Johnson, 26, and the other mom friends in my neighborhood just judging me. I mean, it was so hard. It was so painful. And I just, and that was years ago. And I clearly,
Well, it's bad enough
it's
having
hard.
visible disability, and then like a lot of us probably have had happen as people come over and chastise you because you have a handicap placard, you know,
Yeah.
you look just fine, especially if you're
Or
young.
I don't even know that they knew I was on disability. I wasn't working. They said I was anorexic. And I just remember thinking, this is so painful. You have no idea what's going on and you're making all these things.
Yeah.
Like just, no
Yeah.
time for people like that. Okay. What can I do about my last doctor saying my EDS and other health issues are psychosomatic in my chart? Good question.
I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
To be somatic, there has to be nothing physically wrong with you. So if you have mast cell and you have POTS, I'll give you a quick short story. I helped a family that the hospital was going to put her in the psych ward, and she came to the ER because she was passing out and she was vomiting, and they just thought she was crazy. And I said, well, is POTS in her medical records? Is mast cell in her medical records? Yes, it is. So well, those two things can cause what brought her into the ER in the first place. So having said that, it wasn't just my way of testifying that this is why she was there. I happen to know a psychiatrist that was actually in a neighboring state that knew these conditions, and he contacted them as well and said, if you put her in that psych ward, you're going to hear from me. You know.
I mean, the bottom line is most providers and health systems and hospitals have a method of objecting to things that are in your record. Okay, it's going to differ from the hospital or the provider, but if you, and a lot of times it's not going to be taken out of there. You're just allowed to add something, in opposition of that. So if you want to
Right. So you can fight it or to have a correction added to it.
Oh yeah,
versus
and if
Yes.
you're lucky enough to know some of the doctors, the big name doctors that have a lot of experience in a particular condition, they can be very helpful because they can write something up and say, I have 150 patients that have mast cell. This is what happens when you have mast cell, and this is what this person has. Then
Well, how incredibly insulting anyway to put that, because it really it stigmatizes and just further diminishes the true severity and disability with people suffering with mental health. I mean, it's horrible.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
just, it's horrible. And the struggles that people go through, whether or not it's primary or it's because of,
Mhm.
you know, just losing their life or whatever it
Yeah.
is. Like you said, I mean, why wouldn't you be, you know, have anxiety and depression if you were dealing with all this? I mean, it's just,
Yep.
it really, really, really is just, I hope that we move away from this because it's
I
just,
hope so too. Well, I'm doing my damnedest.
yeah. And I just think about the kids and how it affects kids, and it just makes me
Yes.
so angry. But I think there's a lot of positives about that. And I think things are turning around to really understand that even psychosomatic is really rooted in a true, very deep-seated, more involved, multi-systemic issue. And they just are naive, and they were not taught, and just dismissive of
Well,
really
if the
understanding the
doctor goes
body.
to do, I don't care what hospital you come from, big hospital or not, sometimes big hospitals are worse because they get stuck in something they think it's true, but it isn't true. You know, or they
Look what
say, oh,
happened in,
POTS isn't real. You know, fibromyalgia isn't real. Really? Okay, so my pain is not real. Okay, my problems are not real. Okay. You know, it's just because they don't do the research, they don't do the reading, they just make an opinion. You know?
well, look what happened in Utah. There was an EDS clinic that had to be shut down or was stopped. I think
Oh, I
that's
didn't hear
still the
about that.
case.
Really?
Yeah, it was a couple years ago, and they went further forward with more of focusing on a conversion, like what is it called?
Diversion disorder?
Yes, clinic.
Yeah.
I don't even know. I have no words. And
Yeah.
there was a wonderful doctor that really fought for a lot of EDS patients, and she was so aware of all the comorbidities, and she was great, and they were making progress, and there was a geneticist, and yeah, so sad. Okay, I have another question here, and I'll just double check if I have a few more that I've missed, but I'm coming to my last one, and then I have two that are very
Okay.
quick. What do I do if my last doctor saying my EDS and other health, oh, we read that. Okay, Social Security, look at your social media. We went through, okay, I'm just making sure I answered everything. Open. Okay, is there ever a situation where you can get emergency approval faster? Is there ever that type of situation? I mean, I know John, yours was really fast, but is there ever a situation if somebody's really, you know,
So Social Security has what they call compassionate allowances, okay, and they're a list of disorders that they're going to look at right away as opposed to going through the whole process because they deem them more significant. EDS is not in the compassionate allowances, okay? That's why you want to do all these things up front to strengthen your case. Once you're waiting for a hearing, if you have good medical documentation, you can ask the judge for a on the record decision. So he would make a decision without going to a hearing. But again, you have to have some pretty strong medical information in order for the judge to do that.
and I think it's
Sure,
important
some
for
people
people to
probably-
understand that,
How do you get on
yeah,
the special allowance list? How do you get on the listing of parents? That really has to be through the organization's efforts. They
right.
have to step up, go to these Social Security sessions about the compassion allowance or about the listing. There's a lot of work that has to get done, but what we forgot to mention was I'm actually part of the reason why the Markman Foundation has that listing, that second larger listing, is me and another advocate. We wrote testimonials and the foundation took it forward and we got it listed.
Well, and I think that's also important to distinguish why EDS is not on there. There's 14 types of EDS that we know, probably more, and there are, you know, a good majority of people that work and do fine, and they don't even, you know, they have different types. I just think
Yes.
the nuances of EDS are so varied and severe, and not everybody goes on disability. Not everybody has to, and everybody's case is so different. And there are 14 different types that are individual conditions in them themselves in terms of how they affect the body. So, I think that's important too. So
Yeah.
to understand it, for people to understand, which also then helps them put their case together
Yes.
if the medical information that they're providing is sound as well.
Right.
So emergency situation. Okay, I asked you about the percentage of disability. We mentioned not everybody is disabled or has to go on disability with EDS, and the difference between Marfan's and, you know, different types of EDS. Let me just make sure. Okay, somebody said, Kathleen, are you available for hire?
You know, I'd be happy to talk with anyone. I believe my contact information is somewhere.
Okay,
Done.
we'll make sure that we share, or Danielle can and Christina can share that with the group afterwards.
Yeah,
I can also type it in the chat. I don't know, what is the best way for them to get?
best way
to
is
get a hold of you?
email initially, and that way we can set up a phone call.
Okay, what is your email? I'm just going to go ahead and put that in the chat right now, and then
And
Danielle
so
and
it's
Christine.
K Kane Law, so KKANELAW at Comcast.net.
KKANE law. Okay, that's right, because I Comcast.net.
No,
And
it
then
depends
John, what
also
is yours?
It also depends on what stage. I'm sorry.
What's yours?
Oh, what's mine? What's my best one to do? I would say JR Marfan, MARFAN 58 at AOL.com.
You said 58.
Yeah, JR.
So
Marfan
JR Marfan 58.
58 at AOL.com, because that's the one I usually go back and forth with Facebook and everything else.
Okay, hopefully I wrote that right.
Yeah.
I feel bad when I'm so close to the screen because I'm honestly,
All
I'm so
right.
sorry, everybody. Okay, let me make sure that I didn't miss anything. Thank you so much. Everybody's asking. Okay, not how much is a disability lawyer? You already went over that. And what is their take of your win? So can you explain that again?
I'm sorry, could you repeat
Oh,
that?
somebody asked about how much is a disability lawyer and what is their take of your win, and it was answered in the chat, but I know you went over it. If you just wouldn't mind just
Yeah, so
repeating it.
your retroactive benefits, the attorney would receive 25% of your retroactive benefits. If you are not successful, then they don't get a fee. Technically, they can charge you for expenses. Expenses are usually medical records, and a lot of times you can get them for free. So,
And that's why we always suggest you get your medical records on your own, so you have them. Then you can always give the attorney a copy of them.
oh, and I'm sorry, 25% of your retroactive with a cap of $6,000.
So if you got
Is that
$20,000.
whoa? There's a
pretty
cap of
good.
$6,000.
Yeah, that's the
Wow.
that's the most. But you know, the other thing is a lot of lawyers and advocates think my wife's crazy because a lot of lawyers don't want to go near another Danlos case or a Marfan case because they're much harder to win. If you don't win, you, like Kathy said, you don't.
You're not
win,
going
you
to
don't
get paid.
And
Right.
but that's people who know us, and you know us, Kendra. We're in it to help people. So
That's absolutely right. Well, and not only that, but the fact that it can take so long is so scary and daunting, and you want to have your best chance forward to get to the point of being approved and getting the win. I think is really important. I know employment lawyers, if you have issues with employment, you know, with an employer, they do something similar. They take a percentage of your, you know, over and above your severance or something. So it's similar. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything. Are there any decisions? What is the website to apply? I know it's written in here, but just we can.
yes.
www.ssa.gov, and there's a big block that says disability on the front page, and then it'll take you through applying for disability.
All right, www.ssa.gov.
Yes.
Okay.
And when you're all set, Kendra, I just want to just say a couple of quick things when you're done.
All right, I think we're pretty much almost done. There was one clarifying question that when we were talking about when things are recalculated to go to, it says the question about recalculating, and it has to do with, you know, when you're going from Social Security disability to, and I'm thinking my brain fog is showing. It should have been referred to what was paid into the system, not taxes paid. I think that somebody was clarifying that to me. So the question about recalculating was referring to what was paid into the system, not taxes paid. I think I'm understanding it. Danielle, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so
somebody else.
I usually don't get into that part of it because, you know, again, I'm helping people get it. But logically, if you're putting into the system, then that's counting towards your retirement as well. So
Danielle, you want to say something?
Yeah, the question going back, what is the best way to get records changed if the doctors do have something like psychosomatic or Munchausen's in there? Do you write a letter and have it included in the file?
No,
What extent
the best thing is whatever institution it is, you find out if they have a records department, whoever handles the changing of records, they're going to give you a form, or some of them do it differently. They have some way to do an addendum. But your present doctor that's treating you now that knows that that is not true, and that they are treating you for this particular thing that causes the issue that originally was said by that moron doctor, and they can write a letter of support to add with the addendum. Or fill out maybe fill out some of that form.
Yeah, but the key is every system, so to speak, every health system is going to be different, and you'll have to, follow their procedures, and there's usually a form involved.
Thank you. I want to thank you to both. We've been excited about having you do this, and we've had some questions. We really do appreciate your time.
No
Yeah,
problem.
It was very thorough too. I mean, this was very, very helpful. It always is, but it was very thorough in terms of different situations. And this is just really, it's awesome. So thank you both.
Who was your favorite, me or my wife?
I don't know. I'm thinking
Danielle?
Kathleen was MVP today in terms of, John, you were the last time. I told
Oh
you.
man, wow. I did want to tell you all something, and it's really important for people to do, is that 1,200 a month, that maximum that you can't go over is a ridiculous amount of money. And you really need to contact your congressman and congresswoman and your states and let them know, how can anyone live on that small amount of money? It's insane.
Can you explain that a little bit more? I know you guys referenced that before, and I know the maximum that you can get in terms of disability, but what was the number that you all are referring to?
So there's something called substantial gainful activity, and it changes every year. So,
Okay, I see what you're saying.
yeah. So if you're above substantial gainful activity, you're automatically not deemed disabled. Okay.
And that's why a lot of people will move back in with their parents, because they can't afford to live on their own. Or if they could get work that made them over that 1,200 amount, they'll lose their SSI or they'll lose their SSDI. I can't make more than 1,200 a month, or they're taken away from me. Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. I mean, considering even if you get the max amount plus you make 1,200, I mean.
Yeah, it's sadly insane, because I could be a consultant for a couple hours a week, and I could easily make over 1,200 a month. But if I did, it's
Absolutely.
taken away from me. And that doesn't mean I can work full time. It just means I can make more than 1,200 a month.
Right, and that also affects your health benefits, if I'm not mistaken, too. I mean, I don't know your health situation, but some people are on, you get health benefits also on disability.
So
Or
if you're on SSDI, after 2 years after you're deemed disabled, you're eligible for Medicare, which
right,
is
okay.
a really good thing, I think.
Mhm.
Number one, you do have to have a supplemental policy, but supplemental policies are usually pretty inexpensive as compared to a regular policy, number one. And number two, with Medicare, you can usually go to other states for treatment, which not everybody can do with the plan that they have now. So Medicare can be huge.
Yes.
Yeah, it really can. And, even just going through the health exchanges or just trying to find insurance, I mean, the cost is
Yes.
not cheap.
Right.
But it's good, Kendra and Danielle and everyone, that if you can get somebody in the family that's healthy or a parent that's healthy to get life insurance, so for the children or whoever is disabled, that money can be put into a trust, what's it called?
Special
I'm
needs.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I know that I've mentioned that several times to parents about, the
Right.
diagnosis and not wanting my kids to be formally labeled, because down the line, I don't want to jeopardize their health insurance or life insurance. But that's really important to understand. And I don't fully understand it, but I recently heard what you were just talking about. So both protective in terms of being them to make sure they have it long term, but also what it can do.
Mhm.
And there's different types of life insurance. And can you explain that a little bit more for people?
Well, you talk about life insurance?
Yeah, like
Well,
for a
if you
kid.
have a disability, you usually get a very low policy. Like
Oh yeah, if you get approved.
If you get approved, yeah, if you're approved and then you file, because you have a disability, those forms you have to fill out, answer 3 questions. And one of them is, have you been in the hospital more than once or twice a year? Yeah, yeah, I have. Have you had any kind of, so they ask you those questions. We usually only can get small policies. I think Mutual of Omaha, I have one, but it's only like 20 grand. It's ridiculous.
Well, EDS is now like almost a red flag in every case. I have a life insurance policy, thank God. I fought like hell for it and had a whole bunch of doctors help me, say that I couldn't. But now I understand that it's not it's very hard. It's almost like even HEDS is,
Yeah.
it's nearly
Well,
impossible.
That's why I help, if you know a healthy person, doesn't have to be a significant other, can be an uncle, an aunt, or anyone that has good health, you can get a pretty good sized plan. And then that money, like I said, you put into the reason why you put into a special needs trust, Kendra, you probably know this, is you want to protect the person because some people, let's face it, can blow right through their money. And you don't want someone to blow through their money. You want just to have monthly amount of money to keep them, protected.
Right, and this also applies to kids. If, there are benefits, I never thought there'd be, I thought it was morbid to think about life insurance for kids,
Mhm.
but it's not in considering if they ever do get a diagnosis, protect them, but also I believe the type of life insurance policy is the one that like you pay for it, but it also can then, they can use it as a loan for education later, different things, and it can pay them back versus like what my life insurance I pay now. That it's just, it's
Absolutely.
just, so
Yeah.
knowing the differences about that and how to both protect your kids, but also protect them from a later diagnosis and,
And knowing what's in your state, because I'm very fortunate, we live in Massachusetts, we have called Mass Health. It's an awesome program. Pretty much everyone in the state is insured. And no matter what political, because I don't get political or religious in any of my work, but this really is excellent. Mass Health is an excellent system. I wish every state had that, but
everybody's insured. Is it a health insurance or like life insurance through
health
Mass
insurance, health insurance.
Whoa,
My brother's.
okay,
Yeah.
Because of that.
that's awesome. All right, well, I feel like there's just so much information that's so helpful for us being able to function and live and find ways to live better. And I think restore function and live well, just whatever level you can. I think about that is so helpful and hopeful. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Any last minute questions, anybody? Now, oh, wait a minute, I have one more. Sorry, one more. What is it? Oh, I think Danielle asked it. What is the best way to get changes made to your medical record? Okay, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you
you.
both
Thank
so much. It was wonderful to see you virtually and to connect again and for you to do this for the group. I can't thank you enough. It's awesome information.
It's
So
our
thank
pleasure to
you.
You're
help.
welcome.
You're
Take
welcome.
care, everyone.
Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.
Bye-bye.